This conference will now be recorded.
Excellent. So again, welcome everybody. This is our first official kind of topic as part of the Apex program. I'm not going to go into a ton of details at this point. You all obviously joined us tonight because you've heard something about this. I will take some time, the latter part of the session, and explain how Apex works a little bit more. But fundamentally, as an introduction, this is a job search program. And for the most part, we're going to focus on careers in consulting due to the current schools and different universities that we're working with right now. There's a large interest in consulting. I will speak always in Apex about job searches in general and what it's like to go after selective organizations. And then a lot of that has to do with roles in consulting. Okay. And we're just going to give a little bit of that overview tonight. So as an introduction, some of you I may have some introduction to previously. Some of you we may be meeting for the very first time. So I just want to say hello again. My name is Pam Schilling and I lead our team at Archer Career. We have a great foundation and history in career advising and coaching. I personally spent about 8 years of my career post MBA after my time at Chicago Booth as a strategy consultant. I worked for 3 different firms. And then in and around that, I spent about 10 years in the technology industry. And so I've been a student, much like you. I've been a hiring manager. I've had to interview at various stages of my career. And then I went back actually into the career services arena at my alma mater, Chicago Booth, for a couple of years before I started Archer Career. And we're really lucky. We get a chance to work with amazing students, amazing universities. It's super fun for me and the team. And I'm excited to get a chance to work with all of you. That's one of the things that's really nice about this program is we get a chance to interact over several weeks. And part of my job is to make this engaging. We're all sitting on a webinar. I know that that can be a bit draining, so I try to keep it lively and light and very pragmatic. As we get started, because I do want to make sure that there are elements of this that are participatory, you've already done it. Go back to the chat, and while we're talking, let's enjoy some conversation. Go into the chat. What's your favorite beverage? It's fall. We can count how many people might say pumpkin spice latte or how few people might say pumpkin spice latte. But I'm always excited to know what the in beverages are, and you guys can decide what beverage means to you. And then just again, as a little bit of introduction, our organization has been at this for about a decade. We've worked with a lot of different professionals, a lot of different schools. Students have gone into some of the most recognized companies in the US and abroad. And part of what we do is we bring the best practices of what it takes to get hired by these organizations to you. And then through this program, as well as our software, we break the job search down into manageable pieces. Everybody's busy these days. We want you to know the best practices. And over time, working with a lot of the universities, starting with some of the elite MBA programs and then moving into other highly regarded graduate programs, we've developed a very strong track record. And we work very hard at it. We do a lot of research. We're constantly in the marketplace talking. And the other thing is we tend to work with students that are making bigger transitions, going from the sciences into business, people that are in specialty master's programs, part-time MBAs. So some of that I say because not all of us are a round peg, fitting into a round hole. Some of us are an oval peg or a square peg, and there's some, differences to doing a job search when you're making those types of transitions. So we have a lot of expertise with that. The program that you all are having the opportunity to participate in, Apex, one of the things we're excited about, historically, we've only ever done this exclusively at a few large schools. And that was a benefit to those students, but it didn't necessarily allow us to reach as many students. Well, now with some thought and some feedback and some fantastic partnerships, we are able to bring the Apex program to all of you on your campuses. And we may be doing much of this virtually. For some of you, there may be some things we actually get to do face to face. And again, we'll talk a little bit about some of the intricacies through our webpage, Archer on Campus. You guys are going to have an opportunity to join our community web pages and then also access the software. I'm not going to talk too much about that tonight, but know that those resources are coming to you, okay? And each campus has a little bit of a different way that you're participating in the Apex program. We'll try to make sure that you understand that. And, like anything, it's kind of like seats on an airplane. Some people have certain types of seats at certain rates. And that's, a nature of the business. But you can always come to me if you aren't sure about your individual situation. Okay, so we are going to talk about two things tonight. One is I want to set some context for particularly moving into business careers, highly selective organizations, and what that means. And then I also want to talk a little bit about the roadmap to do that. So if everybody could go back into the chat and let me know maybe what it is that you're exploring. Are you thinking about consulting as a career? Are you thinking about another area within business? Are you just learning for the very first time? And that will help me just to calibrate some of my comments, if you will. And there is a lot of coffee in that chat, by the way, which is not surprising. I too am a huge coffee fan. In fact, I have 2 coffee pots on my coffee station. I don't know what that says about me, but I do have 2 coffee pots. I probably could have a third. And as I'm leaning into this, so because we do have a bit of a diverse group at this stage, one of the things that I want to make sure that you all have a sense of, there's a standard set of kind of webinars, workshops that we're going to do as part of Apex. And then there are specialty sessions. So for those of you that are PhD students, we have some specialty sessions set up. Those allow us to talk more around particular matters that somebody pursuing a PhD will be a part of. With other particular campuses, we may have a program specifically for your campus. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit about business jobs. Again, I'm going to focus a little bit on consulting tonight, and we'll try to connect as many of the worlds as possible. But this will be great for Q&A if you have anything more specifically that you want me to talk about. Okay, so one of the things I want to establish as a starting point, you guys have a lot of resources at your disposal. And frankly, one of the challenges is that many of you have a lot of resources, and trying to navigate all of that is challenging. One of the best things is to make sure no matter where you are in your academics, your career team on your campus. They have great resources. They can guide you. Sometimes it's a 5-minute question. Sometimes it's 25-minute question, but make sure you take advantage of that. And then along with other resources like alumni, certain companies, your friends and your family, those are fantastic places to go and to learn and to get information. And then you have kind of the pieces of your academic program. Many of you have consulting clubs on your campus if you're interested in that. There are other types of student groups that are very career oriented. I mean, certainly there's some that are fun oriented too. You have peers. Sometimes we feel like we're the only person doing what we're doing, but there are plenty of your peers that are maybe thinking about the same thing. That's one of the elements, frankly, of our Apex program is we're trying to bring together like-minded individuals, because sometimes within campuses, it's hard to find people that are thinking about doing the same things that you are, or to have those conversations in a way that you feel comfortable. And faculty can be interesting. I know that working with a lot of PhDs, over the course of my career, sometimes it's difficult to have career conversations with your faculty, with your PIs, with your faculty advisors. But there are often other faculty on campus, and then other staff resources. So, just know that you have a great portfolio of resources, and part of what we are bringing as Archer Career is, one, an additional resource, but also a way to maybe aggregate those and organize them in a little bit more of a manageable fashion. So let me, kind of lean into this conversation about careers, career paths, getting a job search, and some of the more selective organizations. I tend to myself, in the nature of my coaching work up to this point, I work with people that are going for very ambitious roles. They're either trying to get hired by people like McKinsey, the Boston Consulting Group, Bain, LEK, sometimes Goldman Sachs in the investment banking world, and then oftentimes many of the well-known technology companies, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Stripe, name your favorite technology company. So I spend a lot of my time thinking about highly selective organizations. This could be the same, even for getting a really high quality postdoc or residency, or even into a PhD program. It's hard. It's a very difficult mountain climb. What we do, though, is we deconstruct the process. The people who have climbed that mountain and done so successfully, how have they done it? And part of that is research and knowledge and understanding the future and the role and what you're heading towards, and what are the responsibilities of those roles, and then what are the hiring criteria for those roles. So if I take consulting as an example, and consulting is a very typical business job, but I can even extrapolate this into other fields. But if I just take consulting as an example, you're an advisor, you're doing high impact work, you are helping with decision making, and then there's some planning that goes on, and that planning is then implemented. This is very typical of the type of business roles. Now there's a lot of other specialty roles that do more specific things. Could be marketing, could be product management, could be research, could be supply chain. And one of the things to always do is to make sure you really understand what the job is and what's important in that job. Myself, having been a consultant for many years, even as a career coach, I was considered a consultant. It's very much an advisory role. And that's really different than some of the other business jobs that are out there. Then you can take that and you can break it down into attributes of that job. And again, this is something, depending on the direction that you're going, that you want to research. You really want to make sure that you know the fundamentals of what you're going to be doing. And I look at this from a little bit of a higher level. I don't have things here like building spreadsheets and creating PowerPoints and doing conjoint analysis and writing SQL code. I'm at a much higher level. And many of the roles in business, and particularly roles in consulting, you're dealing with some type of a client. Could be a client, could be a customer. There's a slight differentiation. When you're a consultant, you're dealing with clients, and usually you're trying to deliver something to move that organization forward. There are goals of the business, and you want to make sure that you really understand that. It could be increasing market share. It could be improving customer experience. It could be expanding operations internationally. Knowing the goals of a business and a particular business are very, very important. The third thing then is influence. And this is the thing that I think so many, if you will, ambitious professionals want, is to make an impact and to be close to the decision makers and to try to put your quality thinking and your smarts and your analytics to work, and how to influence decision makers. That was something I know was one of the drivers for me to leave the corporate roles that I had in financial analysis and move into consulting. I wanted to have more influence. That might sound a little bit arrogant, but I felt like I had, great ideas that were going to help the business, and I just wanted those to be heard in a more particular way. So those things allow you to start thinking about why you want to be in a role. And this is one of the things that I often set out as one of the first steps in a job search. To be honest, one of the first things that people do in their job search is work on their resume. It's actually kind of backwards. The two things you should do at the start of your job search, and I actually see some of these questions in the chat. One of the questions is, what do you want to do in the future? What do you want to do longer range? What are the ways that you want to impact the business world, the world around us, our society, government, politics, medicine, economic development, emerging markets? Where do you want to be? It's cliche, but where do you want to be 5 or 10 years from now? And then what we do is we kind of come back closer to time. And then when you think about that job that you want to be in, understanding why you want to be in it. And do you understand the value of that role? So again, back to my example with consulting, people love consulting because you get to be a trusted advisor. You're talking to executives. It's kind of fun. One of the partners that I worked with some years ago gave me this book, and it's actually called, you can see with the shadow, The Trusted Advisor. And it's all about the role that consultants play in advising senior business leaders. The other thing you do is you tackle business problems and you're trying to think through solutions. Sometimes it's a crisis situation. Sometimes it's ambition that an organization wants to do something better and be more innovative. Sometimes consultants are hired because a company doesn't have the expertise in-house and they need you to work on something that their own people can't. Then there are executives and leaders of organizations that want a fresh perspective. They've heard it all. Maybe the people on their teams don't tell them a lot, and they just need to hear from somebody else. And then there's this idea of, people are very, very smart, intelligent. They go into roles like consulting, and you get to hire that person and have really good, smart people that you can ask questions of and have them dig into analyses. So when you all are thinking about the path that you want to be on, whether it's consulting or something else, you want to know a little bit farther down the road. And then when you come to that next position that's leading you there, why is it that you want to be in that role? And a lot of that comes down to what is it you want to impact, okay? And, again, just as some demonstration, even in my own consulting work, and I was very much a generalist. They talk about that in consulting. I worked on a lot of different business issues. I worked with many different industries. I was less specialized. These days, you can kind of go in either direction depending on your interest. But I worked with an airline that was going through Chapter 11 bankruptcy. I worked with a retail organization that way, way, way long ago sold DVDs with music and movies and video games. And they thought that they were going to be completely put out of business. Uh, Almost 15 years later, that idea seems so obvious because they were. But we were there at that absolute moment of disruption and trying to build a strategy for that. I live here in Chicago. One of my projects was to help the Chicago Transit Authority launch a smart card to pay for transit. That was, super exciting, super difficult, but you're trying to bring something into the public good and think about how you do that. I worked for FedEx at one point, and that was a very interesting project because we were building a contingency plan if they had to completely change their business model. And then at one point I worked on the Chicago Olympic bid. So lots of very, very different things. And each one of these in different ways was kind of at the heartbeat of these organizations. In some situations, it was a crisis. In some situations, it was a little bit of an ambition. And those are the things that make these types of roles exciting for people. And it certainly was for me. Ultimately, I chose to leave consulting largely for personal reasons. I was getting married and just kind of wanted a little bit of a different flow in my career. So I see in the chat about what do you do after consulting and what do you do next? Or if you're thinking about careers in business, this is always an important question to ask because career paths are very fluid, and I think career mobility is very much top of mind for a lot of people these days. You all may know this, but the average professional changes jobs every 4.8 years. I hate to be so specific, but I was reviewing the data the other day. So something between every 4 and 5 years. People in their 20s change jobs almost every 2 years. And sometimes it's a job change, doing what you do and going to a different organization. But for many people, they're actually moving into a very different field. I did that. I was a financial analyst. I moved into consulting. Then I was a consultant, and I moved into careers and higher education. And we work with a lot of people that are making those changes quite frequently. So, it's something to think about. And I don't think it's a problem to at all ask about what the future is. The biggest challenge for people that go to consulting firms, quite honestly, in this type of a job, is that for most people, consulting is a temporary role. Most people stay in consulting about 2 to 4 years. Only about 10% of consultants actually stay to rise to the level of partner or managing director. So it is important to think about what you're going to do after. It's also fun because you can do many, many things. Consulting is the decathlete training. So whatever you're thinking about doing, it might be possible. I have a colleague of mine who started her career as a consultant. She now leads a charter school. There was a gentleman who was a very senior person at McKinsey. He now is the president of the Washington football team, going into sports. People do all types of things. This is, like I said, exciting and challenging. If you don't know the path that you want to be on in the future, there are many advantages to going into something like consulting as opposed to other areas of business? Part of it is because while there, you can explore. If you want to explore life sciences companies, fantastic. If you want to explore companies that are in industrial goods, fantastic. If you want to work in emerging markets with some of the firms, you might be able to do that. If you want to work in the social sector or in sustainability, you have an ability to ask to do projects in those areas as long as you're a strong performer and that type of work is going on. So what many people will do is they'll spend a few years in consulting and they'll think about different industries. And then after a couple of years, 2, 3, 4 years, when they decide to leave, they have a little better understanding. It's almost like doing the consulting job, but experimenting around your career interests. And I remember a student I worked with who was going to McKinsey, and we were talking, and he said, I'm really interested in ed tech. He had started his career as a teacher. Eventually, he moved into industry and operations for an oil and gas company. He went to McKinsey. He's like, I think maybe when I leave, I'd like to go work for an ed tech. So he had a chance to meet the people at the firm that were doing work in ed tech. After, I think, 3 years that he was there, he left and he didn't go to an ed tech, but he did go to more of a startup company. So he liked the tech, but maybe, there was another opportunity that wasn't quite that exciting, or the ed tech side wasn't as interesting. So that, isn't super precise, but the real answer is if you know what you want to do in the future, you can probably go do that. If you don't know, it's also a chance to work with people and very directly almost network within your own organization and get on projects that allow you to see and explore those industries. Okay. So a couple of questions, what qualities are good? What kind of, things do you need to do to get hired? So I want to talk about that for a few minutes. And what I like to start out saying is that some of the roles in business and then in consulting, they want you to be what I call a decathlete, or, kind of an Olympic level general athlete. And the more selective the firm, the more Olympic level you need to be. The most selective firms, you've got to be really sharp and really well prepared. But the interesting thing about consulting is that your background is not an entrance criteria. Whether you are studying medicine or philosophy or public health or ancient linguistics, there are plenty of people that go into consulting from just about every field of study that you could imagine. It isn't as easy for everyone, and that's where you think about the hiring process, which I'm going to talk about here in a minute. But it doesn't matter what background you have. That is very unique to consulting roles. It also is relevant for certain other roles. Sometimes people from an engineering background will go into investment banking or asset management or venture capital, based on your interests. And there's some very neat transferable skills that carry from what you're studying into those fields. It's facilitated by you doing your homework and to make sure that you know what's really important in those areas, and then what are the skills and the experiences and perspectives that you bring to the table. But if we go back and we concentrate for a second on consulting, any type of a background is great for the general roles. There are specialized roles in consulting. Some examples of that, there are roles in data science. So people that are studying data science, data analytics, they are much, much more technical. And you certainly, if you have a degree in that, that's very, very important. There are roles in operations. So people sometimes who are doing, PhD work in operations can specialize in that. There are roles that focus more on life sciences. There are firms that focus exclusively on life sciences companies. And so sometimes you can get a little bit more specialized. The way I encourage you guys to think about this is a bit of a inverted triangle. I don't know if I can make that with my fingers. Inverted triangle, that's terrible. Many of the consulting firms, they want people that are very broad and have good diverse skills. But then there are some other firms where you can be much deeper, much more specialized. And some of that is your preference and obviously based on what your background is. But the more that you're trying to move from a field into a very different field, sometimes those firms that are more generalized, like a McKinsey, like a Boston Consulting Group, like Bain, are a little bit easier to transition into because they're just more accustomed to intaking people like you. And then what are they looking for? They look for several things, and they're looking at this both in your resume and by way that they engage with you. This is done through events and networking and showing that you have a lot of motivation. So there are typically four things that especially consulting firms, again, selective organizations will look at. So one is your presence, people skills, communication skills. Do you look the part? And that may sound, I don't know, wrong, but it's important. I work with a lot of people that are interviewing with Amazon. The communication skills for Amazon are unbelievable. They have people writing memos. They have people giving presentations. They put you through a very, very tough interview. And the same is for the consulting firms. They're going to be asking, can I put this person in front of a client and they have the maturity and the presence to be able to go in and be respected by the clients that we're working with. The second part then of what they're going to look at, and most of the time when I'm speaking to students, this is the piece that you all really bring to the table. It's the demonstration that you're somebody who can think. There are indicators of that. So your academic performance, things like grades and test scores and recognitions like, cum laude, and those things, they will look at that. They'll look at internship experiences, volunteer experiences, how you've demonstrated your problem solving. If you're someone who works in the area of research, are you working in a lab with someone who is regarded in your field? If you have had publications, are they in high impact publications? Do you have any citations? Have you given conference presentations? They're looking at evidence of that. When it comes to the kind of work that you've done, can you show that you've created change? That's a big thing. So that aspect is important. And then overall impact. Are you someone who's a leader? Do you run a student organization? Do you bring ideas that people listen to and put into place? Are you working on analyses that through those you create insights? Have you had awards? Have you received grants? There's a lot of those things. And as I'm talking, some of you may be thinking, oh yeah, I've got all that stuff. Fantastic. No problem. Some of you may be saying, gosh, I don't know that that's something that immediately jumps out at me. Okay, and that's something to investigate and do a little bit of self-assessment. But that impact is something that's very, very important because when an organization is looking at students from a given institution, they're benchmarking you against your peers within that academic program. And then across academic programs, you're really trying to show that you're someone who stands out. So, thinking about that. And while I'm talking about that, I'd love to have you guys go back to the chat and share one fun thing that you do on your campus with your colleagues. That now that maybe we're a little bit more open and able to engage with each other, how are you guys getting back to socializing where you can? It could also be a wish. What would you love to do more of on your campus? And thinking about that. So the other nice thing about that, when you write it down, it almost makes it as a commitment. The last thing that I'm going to mention, and this will be something that we'll talk about continuously in these sessions, is focus. The best students, when pursuing the career, the job search, get the best outcome when the focus and the fit is clear, knowing why you want to do what you want to do, putting your efforts into it, being able to express it, and then showing that whatever that new field is that you're going to, you've done your homework. So one of the questions in the chat is, how do you get hired when moving into a new field if you don't have the relevant experience? One of the most important things is that you do your homework about the field that you want to be in. And that shows me that you may not have everything that I need, but you sure have shown a lot of motivation to do your homework. When I talk to consultants today, some of them are using coding skills. They're doing statistical analysis. They're using, Python to do that, and SQL. Some of the students, maybe they've come back from their internship and they've had to use Tableau. Well, you may not have that skill going in, but you know that it's important to do so with data analytics, and the responsibility is for that. So a lot of what you can do to bridge the gap is to do your homework. Okay. So then there's just a few things, how do you end up succeeding? It's not like there's a recipe, but one of the things that I always encourage people to do, and we'll do this in one of our Apex sessions, is to self-assess. And, where do you have strengths? Where do you have maybe some areas that aren't as strong? And for somebody who's coming and saying, I want to move into a consulting job, I usually go through a set of characteristics. What were your grades or your test scores to this point? What were your academics? What institution did you attend? And did you do something spectacular at that school? I went to a big state university for my undergrad, but I was in the honors program. There were only 100 and some students that were in the honors program, and I was the only student from the business school on my campus in my year. So, how do you balance? If you've worked, if you have work experience, is it for well-known companies? If not, no big deal. You just maybe fill that in with other good leadership experience. If you're moving into business jobs, how do you talk about business? What do you know about business? Do you regularly read the Wall Street Journal? Do you have that orientation? Are you somebody who's a good storyteller? So much of communication is about an ability to tell stories. And then do you have those awards? Do you have recognitions? Did you receive some type of a fellowship? Did you get an award by your department or your peers? Are you really good at applying theory in the real world? It's something that, I remember speaking a few years ago to a student who was studying astrophysics. And I was asking her about her dissertation. And I was very interested, and this person wanted to move into consulting. And I was like, well, how does your dissertation matter in our world? And her first answer was, well, in our world, it really doesn't matter. And I kind of thought, she was being a little bit cavalier. But, then she explained that, in the area of physics, that it was a very, very important topic, that people for years had been trying to research it. And, for her, it was something that had to do with resilience, because it was a very, very complex topic to try to study for many years and build a dissertation and then have some type of a conclusion. So it was kind of interesting, but super, super theoretical. And she wasn't able to necessarily apply the physics theory. I think it had something to do with black holes, if I remember correctly. But what she could apply was the process of her work and how that resilience was going to serve her well as a consultant. So things like that. And then just other, little things when you guys are thinking about, where you are, maybe moving into some of the business roles. And again, consulting, being able to do math and calculations on your feet. A lot of business jobs use data and numbers. What is that presence that you have? Do you command respect and attention? Do you voice your opinion or your point of view? And then ultimately, how committed are you? Probably of all of the things that I find most difficult in our work is motivation. And I say that because a job search can be hard. It can be, time consuming. You could be juggling it with many things, and sticking to it can be difficult. There are sometimes a path of less resistance that's a lot easier. And so in order to move to success, you got to have all of those other stairs in place and then have that commitment. Like, I want this, it's really important, but also doing that to the point where it doesn't stress you, overstress you. So these are the types of things when I think about what help people get the role. There's a question, what are the qualities? This is part of it. Then there's just a little bit of data that I'm going to give you guys, and then I'm just going to talk a little bit about the actual job search process. So when you look at the data, in general, of the people that apply to a firm like McKinsey, 2% of them are hired. 2%. That's super low. Of the people that apply to Amazon, maybe it's like 10%, and these are some of the most selective companies. And some of you may understand this in fields like medicine, it's very much the same. Applying to medical school, sometimes the business schools are the same, even undergraduate programs, right? It's just, it is what it is. In the top ranked MBA programs, something like 20 to 30% of all the applicants get hired by these organizations. The reality is a lot, especially of consulting hiring, is coming out of business schools. That isn't a problem if you are not an MBA in the environment that we're in right now, for two reasons. One is consulting firms have expanded their service offerings, and as a result of that, they are growing. And there are certain areas in particular that are growing. And because of that, they need new hires, and they can't hire any more of those MBAs. They've sort of capped out. And what that's meant is over the past several years, there's been a growing interest in hiring from other types of academic programs. I get super excited about that. And that's why we're all here in a lot of ways. The flip side is, though, one of the things that I know because of the experiences I've had is that MBAs are trained exceptionally well, and they have the business acumen. There's still plenty of people, that number is only 20%, not 80%, but there's a lot of knowledge that goes on about how to be hired by these organizations. That shouldn't be something that you guys worry about, and part of the purpose of this program is to bring that knowledge to you. But it also says, it's hard, it's competitive. You may be the smartest person in your class. It's still really challenging. It's definitely doable, but a good bit of effort is needed. And that's why I started out saying, getting hired by one of these selective firms is challenging. It's a tough mountain to climb, but when you have the steps that you need, when you know what it takes, when you remain optimistic, you will be hired. And I have plenty of evidence that tells me that. Okay. All right. So before I take you through a couple of the actual job search steps, please go into the chat if you guys have other questions. Some of the questions I've seen, I've tried to be able to address them as we go along. Thank you for those, but definitely throw out anything that you're interested in knowing about. All right, so how do you get these jobs? How do you get a business job? How do you get a job in a research institution? How do you get a consulting job? For the most part, there are 3 common steps and 2 steps that differ depending on the type of job that you're going after. And this is the way that we orient all of our job search programs for anybody at any level. One step, and it's often the best first step, is to network. Talk to your classmates, talk to alumni from your school, and take an area that you're interested in. Maybe it's consulting, and ask people, what do you do? What do you like about what you do? What do you think you're going to do in the future? And, what's the advice you would give me? It's very, very simple conversation, but very, very powerful. In parallel to that, you can actually go to the firms themselves. If it's a consulting firm, go to their website. If it's a corporation or a research institution or a public policy organization, go to their website and learn about them, that organization. Learn about the kind of people they hire, because every one of these organizations has a careers page, and we'll actually do a session on this. But if I just take Bain, for example, front of the alphabet, after I let them accept my cookies, up here in the corner, you'll see a careers page. And this is the best place to start. They have a lot of videos. They have a list of roles, and you can figure out where you fit. If you are an advanced degree holder, you need to know what that means. For sure, it means JDs, MDs, PhDs, and postdocs. That's usually what consulting firms mean by advanced degree holders. If you are an MBA, you're typically, something in the summer associate or consultant. And then what you have to figure out is, if you're a master's student, where does that firm fit you? And that's just a matter of looking at what the firms do. The master's degree is kind of the place that doesn't always fit nicely into one of their boxes, but that's why they have opportunities for you to engage with them. Okay, So that's a fantastic starting point. And then you will build your resume. We're going to talk a lot about that. We're actually going to do a couple of sessions. And then you've got to prepare for the interviews. And most organizations these days have two components to their interview. One component is case interviews. The second component is the experience interview. And I won't go into that in a tremendous amount of detail because we're going to be speaking to that in individual lessons and working sessions. But the most important part, I think, for anyone at this stage is to do some networking and to do some research. And even before you sit down and start working on your resume. And that helps you do the self-assessment that's necessary and get a little bit better education. And by the way, most people in business are very happy to talk to you. Most consultants are very happy to talk to you because they're doing so much hiring. And part of the job of consulting firms is recruiting the next generation. Okay. All right. And then the last thing that I'll mention as we wrap up this discussion, there is typically a timeline. And your recruiting timeline is going to depend on where you are in your program and when and how you want to recruit. So for MBAs, they typically recruit for internships in January and full-time jobs in October. For undergraduate students, typically for internships, you're talking maybe late August, early September through September, maybe into October. Just kind of depends. And then full-time hiring is sort of happening in those same windows for the following summer. So undergrad hiring happens very, very early in the academic year. And then for JDs, MDs, PhDs, postdocs, the timeline is not as clear. It used to be that all hiring was done in August. This year, there was hiring in May and June and July and August, and then in January. And part of that is because the consulting firms, in terms of needing more human capital, they know that graduation timelines for PhDs are happening at many different intervals. And they're also happy to have you with a job offer in hand kind of pre-completion of your dissertation. For other masters, for MDs, those programs often are more fixed. So it's just a matter of doing the research. So to prepare, it typically takes 12 to 16 weeks to get through all the steps. That's the research, the networking, putting your resume together, doing the interview preparation. And when we do this program, we lay that out along that timeline. And that's something that, again, because it happens multiple times a year, we're now running this program multiple times a year. But for you and your planning, 8 to 10 weeks is probably the minimum. Some people have done it in less. It's super stressful. I just worked with an MBA student that had about 6 weeks to prepare. She did great, but she had a lot of work to do in those 6 weeks. And she had completed her internship for the summer. So she had no classes for the most part, had no other work responsibilities, and was able to prepare in about 6 weeks. So she probably did about 12 weeks of work in 6 weeks. Okay. Some of the PhDs that I've worked with have actually gone through our workshops twice, kind of first time listening, second time heads down doing the work. So this is a little bit more for you to think about, where you are in your programs, what your recruiting time horizon is, and something it's certainly that, we'll be able to talk about more as we go along. Okay, so just as we're wrapping up, as I've mentioned, the Apex program has many more of these types of sessions. We walk through step by step. The calendar is online. You all are going to be getting a link to be able to sign up and get this calendar with all the sessions. Just kind of depends if you're at a school where we have three levels of this program. Crest and Summit are the levels that have workshops included. Summit has a little bit more one-on-one coaching. So you'll find some information in terms of what you are a part of based on your school. We also allow individuals to sign up and join this program for a small fee if you're not a part of a school sponsored program. So those are the type of things you can always email me. But know that we're doing these sessions about twice a week right now. We record everything so you can watch it if you aren't able to attend. And, again, if you ever have questions, you're welcome to ask. Okay. So we're up at 6. That's all I wanted to cover for the discussion topics, and I'm happy to tackle any and all questions that you guys have. I'm going to turn the recording off to do that so we can have a little bit more of an open discussion.